Okay, so now we're recording. Um, okay, so again, quick note, just so this is on the video. 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is textured. Put all of your texture maps in your source images folder or somewhere under your breakfast folder, and don't forget to set your project before you open your Maya file, because Maya won't know which project folder to look for those textures if you haven't set that project before you open the Maya file. So, all right. So I'm going to show you a couple of things today. Again, quick recap of what we have so far. Mine's very simple, but we used the end particles to simulate a whole bunch of little cereal spheres emitting into my cereal box. So if I go back to the negative like 500 range, we see that it like fills it up with cereal, and then once it's full, starting around frame 0, pours it all out. And the reason I'm able to scrub through mine is because once I got that simulation, I selected the end particle one, and under effects, I went to in cache, and then I created a new cache. I think it's create new cache in object. So you can see the previous video for all of that. If you want to see what that created, in my breakfast project here on my desktop, I have a couple of things. My source images, that's where I'm putting my textures, like I was saying earlier. And I think it's under data, no, under cache. There's this in cache file here, and you'll see that under this cup, all of those files there. So basically what this did is it created an MCX file for every frame of my animation, and that MCX file just tells Maya where each of those particles are in that environment. Okay? So that's what we're doing when we're caching. So if you go to render in the render farm, all of those files have to go up to the render farm as well. Okay? And if you don't set your project, Maya can't always find these files either, so sometimes your simulation will mess up again and you'll have to recache it. So again, this is where setting your project becomes something that you need to kind of pay close attention to. So before I start working in this scene, I always like to just kind of break off into a different Maya scene to show you some examples of stuff, and then we can implement that in this scene. Yes? So, Alt space. M. And arrow. Any of the arrow keys. And then let it know that it's... Isn't that weird? So it's Alt space brings up the move, or it brings up the menu, and then M for move, and then when you hit the arrow button, what that does is it locks that window to your mouse, and you can just drag the mouse over. So,
it's interesting if you try to hit move with the mouse itself, it won't lock because it's not on the screen.
Yeah, it's very weird. Actually, I'm going to show you all this in case you have this issue too. Some of you may have had this before. So what he's having here is like he opens up like some other window. So for an example, let's say he opened the hypershade, right? And instead of showing up on one of the screens, I'm sorry, what's your name one more time? I can do Nathan. Okay. So instead of showing up on the screen that he can see, it's showing up on some monitor that's not there, right? Like it really what it was is we have dual monitors, and it was a reversal of which monitor was the primary monitor the last time he was using it. So if you have something that's off screen and you need to bring it back on screen and you can't see that screen, as long as that window is active, I'm going to go move it over here to this screen, there's a series of shortcut keys you can hit that will allow you to bring that window back onto your screen. So this is a weird little trick. It's Alt space, so you hit Alt and then space, okay? And what that's going to do is that's going to bring up the menu. Okay, now it's off screen, so you can't see that. But one of the menu item options is move, right? And the way we get to move is to hit the letter M. So Alt space and then M, okay? And now we're in move mode, but we can't grab it because it's off screen. So if we hit any of the arrow keys, it will lock our mouse to that menu, and then I can just drag that onto my screen, okay? So it's a really weird set of keys. Again, Alt space, M, and then the arrow key, and that will lock it to your mouse and you can drag it back on screen. Everybody will have that problem someday, and you'll forget all of those shortcut keys. Just come ask me again. I'll remind you. But it's a weird little trick that'll allow you to get your files back or get your window back. Okay. So I'm going to take a minute, open up a new Maya scene, and I'm going to show you how we can make smoke or steam or fog. Strangely, you can also use this to make fire. So let's go ahead and do a new Maya scene. The reason I'm kind of giggling at that is because the system that we're going to use to make smoke and fire and fog is called fluids. Now, the one thing fluids is not really great at making is liquid. Which makes no sense on some level. I mean, you can probably make it do something that kind of looks like liquids, but Maya fluids as an effect is not necessarily for making fluids. It's for making things that move in a fluid manner, right? So that's why we get smoke or whatever. So let me show you how this works. It's a little bit of a different concept, but I think you'll all grab onto it relatively quickly. The hard part is when you want to get something really specific, because there's a lot of inputs involved in this. So again, under our effects menu, we will see fluids right there. Right? So I'm just going to create a 3D container. Okay, this thing, in fluids, 3D container. And what it's going to create is just this box on my desktop. Okay. Just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and set my playback speed to play every frame max real time. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and hide my grid so you can see this. And I'm just going to hit play. And you can kind of see what starts to happen here, right? And if I extend this out further, say 500, you'll see that what we have is a translucent box, and it's sort of filling up with like this white steam, right? Yes?
Okay, so you want the FX fluids that you put on what?
3D container. So let's see, fluids, 3D container. So I want to show you a little bit of how this is constructed. If we go over here in our outliner, you'll see that there is a fluid 1 object. That fluid 1 object is basically this box that we see here. And you will see that parented underneath there is a fluid emitter. So this is still kind of working similarly to how particles do, right? We have this thing that's emitting this effect, and then the fluid container is really how that effect is shown on the screen, right? So this is working differently though than particles. Particles are a whole bunch of points, a whole bunch of like tick marks, like little invisible tick marks, right? That are being spit out into the scene one at a time. Okay? Fluids is what is called a voxel object. Okay? How many of you have heard that word before, voxel? Maya. So, I don't know. A place that a lot of people hear that is in terms of Minecraft. Anybody heard of, like, if you see Minecraft, Minecraft is kind of considered a voxel game? What are you going to say?
I'm having a really weird issue where it's like the box that I drag my mouse over stuff and it just starts disappearing. Like this.
Oh. So it's because it's playing back if you hit stop. Yeah, I agree with it. Yeah, so while something is playing, sometimes the UI does not update correctly. So like if you like click on a new object, it may not show up over in your attribute editor. So you have to hit stop on the play button before it'll update. You're still going to model it, so I'll drop it down to the text, and now should be enough for this. And actually, don't hesitate to ask questions. Like it's okay to, like if you have questions, something isn't working for you, slow me down. I would rather, pause and help you along the way. So we hear voxel in terms of Minecraft a lot because of how Minecraft works, right? How many of you have played Minecraft or at least seen it played, right? So you recognize that you can't have really any shape inside of Minecraft. The only real building block to anything is a box, right? Or a cube, like a 1x1 cube, right? A volume. Now, in terms of Maya, like how we're modeling inside of Maya, we're creating surfaces, but we can go as fine or as far away, as close or as far away as we want, and we'll always be able to retain some sort of resolution to that, right? So we can zoom in to like the microscopic level, or we can zoom way out, right? And things can be made out of objects that are different sizes. What voxel means is, when we use the word voxel, kind of think of it as analogous to a pixel, right? Like your screen on your computer is made up out of a bunch of pixels. And you can't have half of a pixel, right? Like you can only have one pixel. So you can zoom into an image as close as you want. It's just made up out of a whole bunch of dots. You can't have half of a dot. Like the smallest unit of a 2D image is a pixel on the computer. Well, that's what's going on here. These are volume pixels. And so we have to decide how to divide this 3D space up into volumes, right? And we see along the bottom of this box, we see this grid, right? Well, each of those little grid squares is the size of one volume inside of this box, right? So imagine this being filled, like from floor to ceiling, with boxes that are that size of square, right? And what we're seeing is this steam is really just filling those boxes up, right? So we get one of those boxes fills with steam, and because it's filled with steam, the one next to it starts filling with steam as well, right? So we can subdivide how detailed that voxel is, right? Right now it's a 10 by 10 by 10 volume. We can subdivide that to make it a higher resolution. If you have the fluid one selected, you'll see it right here under base resolution. So if I change that to 40, oh, actually no, it's not. Is that it? Yes. You'll see that now I got a whole bunch of tinier boxes in there, and when I hit play, my steam will actually have a little bit more detail to it. So if you have the fluid one selected, it's over here under base resolution. So yeah, so it's very interesting. Like it's basically just filling each of those things up with this fluid, right? So again, I can go in here and I can change where my emitter is. I'm going to lower that down a little bit just so we can see it. And it'll get back to the beginning here in a second and restart.
Your mom's like slow and like.
Is are you really kind of like chugging as it's going? So it's having to calculate every frame, and so all of the effects can get kind of heavy in Maya in terms of how taxing they are on the computer. And the longer it plays, the more taxing it'll get. Right? So I want to show you that, like, basically what we're doing is we're simulating this box filling up. Now, the thing that kind of doesn't work about this is very, very often we don't need our simulation to happen inside of a little box, right? We need it out here in the real world, in space, right? But it would be too taxing on the computer to fill the entire world with little boxes like that, right? So the reason we keep it to this size is so Maya can do those calculations more easily, right? So I'm going to show you something though. We can make this thing automatically resize because right now, all of these voxels over here and all of the voxels over here, they're not being used at all, right? Like they're empty. So Maya's spending all this calculation time on something that doesn't matter. So if I grab fluid 1, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. You'll start seeing that there's a whole lot of options on how we can control this thing, right? And the first one I'm going to look at is this auto resize. So again, it's select the fluid box, auto resize. And this one's pretty easy. We just check auto resize. And then if I go back to the beginning, when I hit play, it's going to automatically change its size depending on what the steam is doing. All right. Yes?
In fluid, it's not showing up, but in fluid shape 1 it is. Is that what
Yes, fluid shape 1. So fluid 1, it may not. Fluid shape 1, it is. Yeah. Now, there's a lot of things we can change in here, and I'm not going to show you all of them right now, but I am going to talk about some of them. So this is simulating volumes, right? And there's a lot of things that go into a volume and calculating how that works that does not go into calculating the trajectory of an object, right? So for example, like density, like I can compress air, I can compress oxygen, and I'll get a different result than if I compress helium or if I compress carbon, right? Well, carbon isn't a good example. Carbon dioxide, right? All of those things have a different issue with density and pressure, right? Another thing that happens with volumes, such as methane, is sometimes it catches on fire and explodes, right? Because it is a fuel or an igniter for a chemical reaction, right? So this is a simple chemical reaction simulator, is what this is. Which means I can do stuff like cause it to have like a fuel to it. So I can turn this into an explosion. Like one of the simulations that kind of comes with Maya as a default is to turn this thing into a nuclear mushroom cloud, right? So I'm going to show you some of that stuff. The other thing I can do is right now, there's nothing really interacting with this other than gravity, right? And so what's happening is it's going in the opposite direction of gravity because usually a lot of things are lighter than gravity. Right? The smoke is going to be lighter than gravity, or lighter than oxygen, so it's going to be sort of pushed upward. So I want to show you some of the things that we can do just to make this look a little more interesting. Like if we scroll down here to, I think it's dynamic simulation. Well, there's a couple things here. That's not necessarily what I wanted to show you. Yeah, contents details right there. So you see a lot of things that we can change in here, like density, velocity, turbulence, temperature, fuel, and color. And we're just going to play with some of these just so we can see what you get out of this. So the first one I want to do is some turbulence. Okay, so I'm going to go back here, and I'm just going to turn up the strength of my turbulence, and immediately we start getting a different result. So I put a lot of turbulence on there. I can sort of scale that back a little bit. All right. So we see that now it's starting to look a little bit more organic, right? A little bit more naturally like steamy. Or we could go up here crazy turbulent and it just gets all like wispy. We can also change like the frequency of that turbulence. And we get all sorts of stuff here, right? So you can just kind of play around with this until you get the right amount of turbulence that you might want. And what we get is kind of a relatively natural looking steam. Now, I'm going to go ahead and let this play just so you can look at it while I talk. Here is an issue, right? Is that what I see here in my viewport is based off of what I have going on with viewport 2.0, right? And the fact that there's no lights in here and that Maya is showing this on a gray background. And so if I were to render this, a lot of what's happening with effects is going to depend on all of those things, right? If you take wood smoke at night from a campfire, right? That looks different than wood smoke during the daytime. Like effects where these are translucent, they have like volume to them, lighting, all of that stuff is really going to heavily influence it. So although you can get an idea of how it's going to look here, you're not really going to know how this final thing looks until you put some lighting in your scene and all of that, right? I tell you that because I often see that be the issue that people have in this project is that they don't do the lighting until the end. And even though their smoke looked great or their steam looked great inside of Maya, once they render it, you can barely see it. So this is where we're going to sort of pop open a render view and maybe do a little bit of test rendering to see what sort of results we're getting, right? So I'm just going to stop it here, go to Arnold render view, hit play, and of course, we're probably going to get nothing because there's no lights in here. Let's see. It may have a little bit of glow to it where we can get some visualization on it. Yeah, so 10 seconds and we got nothing. Now, if I were to go in here and do a sky dome light, we're starting to see a little bit of something here. Right? It'll take it a few seconds to finish up. Either that or I just crashed Maya. There we go. So this is kind of what I'm getting right now with just the sky dome. And if I put a floor in here, let me go and stop this while I rescale my floor. And we're able to see a little bit of something there, right? So again, this is very heavily affected by the way your lighting works, right? So I want to show you a couple of other things in here that will help you change that. Not change the way it's affected, but change the sort of the result you get. So one of the things is under this fluid effect, we have the option to also play around with the color. All right. Now I'm not really going to do it right here. I'm going to do it under, I think it's under shading here. So we can play with the transparency of this. We can play with the glow of this. And right now the color is just constant white, right? So let's look at what happens when I make some of these changes in the render. So if I play with the transparency and I start taking that up, you'll start to see my smoke completely, or my steam completely disappears. If I take this down, it turns it into that, which is not necessarily what we want either. So you can kind of play around with this and get the amount of transparency you want. The glow intensity doesn't really change it too much. Maybe helps it a little bit. The drop-off shape is interesting. So that'll like kind of change a little bit about how it dissipates around the edges. And if we turn that all the way up, you're going to see it's very thick. But if we turn it back down, it's going to start getting a little softer around the edges, right? But again, the biggest thing that is telling about this is that it's gray on this blue ground, right? Or on this gray ground. So if I just select my background, let's give it a different material just so you can see it a little bit better. AI standard surface. I take my specular all the way down, I want to put this on like a light blue ground. And when I hit play there, you're a little bit now able to see the parts that are gray versus the ground, right? Now, but the weird thing about this is that if you look at the fluid under the shading, it says that its color is white, right? So why is it rendering so dark in the center? Any ideas? It's because it's thicker, right? The light is not getting in there. It's not absorbing into it quite as much. Right? So in those areas where it's denser, even though it's white, the light still isn't getting in there to illuminate it. So it's looking like thicker smoke, right? Now this is actually really, to me, this is kind of fun. I can change my color. I can change like this point right here, which is my color. I could change that if I wanted to purple, right? And you'll see that now my smoke is purple. But this is a range of color, right? So I can click here and add a new color point, and I can make that color point green. Right? Now, the thing you'll notice, though, is when I do that, we're only seeing green. Right? And the reason for that is because the color input is set to constant. So we can change that as well. And this is where it gets kind of fun. Because if I change that from constant to something, let's say, like density, then what you're going to see is in the areas where it's most dense, it's going to be purple. And if I start pulling this back, sorry, it's the other way around. The areas where it's most dense, it's going to be green. And the areas where it's less dense, it's going to be purple. Right? So I can start getting this mix in there. I think we can also sort of change this input bias a little bit to sort of slide that around a little bit. Right? Instead of density, we could do something like pressure. Or like, let's say you want it to be purple on the ground, but green at the top. We could do the Y, or other way around, green at the bottom, purple at the top. We could do that. And so we can sort of change the way these colors disperse through this. This is how we make explosions, is because an explosion is going to be like white at the center, and then maybe starts going toward blue, and then from blue to orange, and then from orange to like this dark smoke, right? And adding all of those layers is going to allow you to get sort of the feeling of like this exploding cloud, right? So there's just a lot of stuff we can do with this. What I would say to do is get a rough pass of your lighting down, and then we're going to make an object inside of your coffee cup emit these particles, okay? Or not this particle, these fluids, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and close this and go back to my coffee cup and show you what I'm talking about with that. If I, a second to close this down. There it goes. So right now my coffee cup is empty, which is tragic. Now I know this is in my opinion one of the things that is kind of hard to wrap your head around. No coffee. Yeah, it blows my mind. No, the idea that like we need to fill this coffee cup up with something, right? And we're like, oh, well, we got to do some sort of fluid simulator to pour coffee into this thing. Like, if you're not going to pick your coffee up and shake it around, coffee doesn't look any different than a dark cylinder, right? So I'm actually just going to put a dark cylinder in here and make it a little lumpy, right? Like we can fake coffee. This is a problem that that students sometimes like make more complicated than is necessary, right? In the end, this thing is just going to be a bunch of pixels on the screen. Like the audience is not going to know the difference between a fluid simulation and a cylinder with a texture on it if you do it correctly, right? And whatever gets the job done in an appealing way to get the shot finished is the right way of doing it, right? It's not like a math test where I'm like, oh, you didn't show your work or you didn't solve this in the right way. If what you have is an appealing image at the end of this, then you did it right. So this is a tool. Right? This is not like a series of steps you have to follow. Um, and so if you find a better way of achieving any of these effects, do that. Like this is going to be a program where the outcome is much more important than how you got there. Um, I mean, being able to solve that problem it is, it's nice to know some elegant ways of doing that. But sometimes just the quick and dirty way like solves the problem just as easily. So I'm going to create a cylinder, and I'm just going to kind of move this over here into my coffee cup. If I go to my top view, it'll let me kind of line this up a little bit better. All right. Can hit 4 and kind of line that up. All right. Perspective. Raise that up. And so now if we look, we have some gray coffee. You should not drink gray coffee. Assign new material. I'm going to go ahead and do an AI standard. And I'm going to go ahead and make mine, actually, like, I know that like hardcore coffee drinkers will think I'm a heretic for this. I put a lot of cream and sugar in mine. So I'm going to make mine kind of the way I like my coffee. So I like it to be about like that. So there we go. So when I render this now, I don't know if I actually have any lights in here or not. Right. Like, it's kind of hard to tell a serious difference between that and if we were to have simulated this or filled this up with actual liquids of some sort. Why is that not showing up? I'm not finding my texture. What's happening there? Sorry, I'm curious why my... Let's do this. Edit. That should be showing up. Oh, does it not like GIFs? Okay, fair enough. So I'm going to go ahead and it doesn't like that GIF image that I have on there, so I'm going to go ahead and break this on my coffee cup just so it renders a little bit better. Right click, break connections, and do some actually, let's just take it white. Okay. Now, if you're wanting a little bit of texture on your coffee, there's some stuff we can do in here in terms of bump mapping. Now, I know I briefly mentioned bump mapping in some of the other classes. I'm going to show you this in just another Maya file really quick so you understand it. So I'm going to stop this. There we go. Where you at? So I'm just going to create a plane here. R. And I'm going to create a area light. And if we render this, okay, so we're getting this, right? So bump mapping is a way of adding additional detail to this object without actually having to model detail to it. So what we have here is a light that is shining on this surface, and it is bouncing off of that surface in the same way it would in a real surface, right? If the light is coming from one angle, it's going to hit and bounce off in sort of a 90-degree angle from that, right? What bump mapping does, let me go ahead and assign a new material here. What bump mapping does is allows us to fake that material, right? So I'm going to go ahead and leave my specular up. So we'll be able to find this in the AI standard under geometry, and you'll see bump mapping. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm just going to apply, let's say, this grid to it, right? So let's go ahead and stop this and see if I can, Arnold render view. Really? Let's try a different one. Let's try fractal. There we go. I don't know why the grid wasn't working, but. So this thing is flat, right? But if I zoom in here really close, you'll see that it looks like it's all lumpy, right? And that lumpiness is coming from the bump map. What it's doing is it's changing the way light bounces off of that surface to make it look like it has more detailed shapes in there, right? So let me go back here. I'm going to break that fractal, show you a couple of other things. If I maybe do noise, yeah, that's not a good example. Maybe cloud, no. I don't necessarily know why that one didn't work. Let's try this again. There we go, bulge. So you can kind of see that as I change this bump depth, like what we're getting is seemingly this object has stuff that's like kind of raising and lowering. And you'll notice that if I move my light, the way it interacts with that is correct as if it were really raised and lowered in those areas. Okay? A bump map uses basically a black and white map, a black and white image, to make areas on your model look like they're either raised or lowered. Later, you'll hear this referred to as a normal map. Normals are just information on how light bounces off of your model. And so a normal map will allow us to control how the light bounces off in all three axes. So don't sweat that too much. Just know that we can add a little bit of detail on this thing to make it look more textured, right? And let's see if this one works. If I grab this, break this connection, and let's add the simplex noise. Yeah. So with this, this looks a little bit more like real noise. Right? And I can change the amount of it just by raising and lowering this value. And you'll see that it looks like it's lumpy even though it's not. And so I can go in here and sort of change this and get something that's really noisy or something that's just kind of wavy. Right? So we could do something like that on our coffee. So there's just a lot of different options for bump mapping. I'm trying to figure out what I think would be the best one. It may be fractal. It may be... Nah, I don't like Brownian. anyway, so we can play around with that to get whichever options we really like. So go ahead and close that.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Which attribute did you put the bump on?
So I'll show you one more time on this one. So where I've selected my coffee here, if I go to scroll down here under geometry and expand that, it's under this bump mapping. And so right now I'm going to go ahead and add, I believe that simplex noise was probably the better option. Now this is something that you can create your own bump map too, if you would like. So let's just do simplex noise, hit play on that. And you'll start to see we're getting a little bit of information there. I think the bump depth is a little too high, so I'll put that like 0.2. And so now we just got a little bit of ripples in our coffee, clouds in our coffee. And again, I can play around with the specular and do whatever we need to turn this into whatever coffee shape we really want it to look like. So I can fight around with that a little bit. But once you have your coffee looking the way you want it to, now we need this thing to emit steam. Okay? So let me go ahead and hit stop on this render. Move this off to the side. And under our fluids option, right? Let's see. If we go to add edit contents, we have this option to emit from an object, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my my coffee shape. I'm going to go to fluids, add edit contents, and emit from object. Container and at least one mesh. Oh, apparently I need a container first. So what I'm going to do is fluids, 3D container. Can I just make a container? No. So do a 3D container, right? And I'm going to go ahead and move that container around my coffee, like this. And then grab my coffee, and then it's fluids, emit from object. What is happening? Oh, I got to do the fluid container as well. Yeah, there we go. And so what I should get now, I'll have to, it'll start on frame 1, I think, or 0. There we go. Now my coffee is steamy. So a little too much, right? Go back to 0 again. Look at that. The whole thing's steaming up. I'll probably go ahead and grab my this object. I don't need it to be as tall as it is. So I'll make it really, really small, right? And move that up there to the top, something like this. And that way it's not going to emit quite as much. There's a lot of different things we can do to this. And again, we don't have to emit it from an object if we don't want to. So we could also undo all of that and just sort of control how our emitter works as well. So right now there's nothing's emitting. And so now I can just do this fluids, 3D container, and then just kind of move this over here so it looks like it's emitting out of the coffee cup. So either of these will work. The only reason I did that is because this feels a little too much to me. So again, stop. Somebody have their hand up a minute ago?
I did. Did you have the, do you have to put the whole object in the 3D container in order, and then you also select the 3D container and the object to make?
Yeah, if you want to do the emit from object, it's kind of up to you if you want to or not. So you can also do what I'm doing here, which is just still the standard emitter. Um, it's just going to be, you know, it may emit through the cup a little bit. So we can set auto resize. And so, right. Now keep in mind that all of these things are like, that's kind of nuclear coffee right now. Um, so we can also kind of go in here and play around with stuff like um, we can turn down gravity so it doesn't go up quite as much. We can turn up the viscosity. And we're just going to get different simulations with this, right? So this is with the viscosity all the way up. Maybe we turn that down just a little bit, right? And add just a little bit of turbulence. Oh, wow. That's way more than just a little bit. And so what we should get now is a slightly different result, right? And again, when we render this, although it looks like it's kind of nuclear right now, it may not render that way. It does. Um, so, so this isn't necessarily what we're looking for. There's a lot of different things we can do. We can turn down our density here, turn down our buoyancy. Actually, density isn't what I'm looking for. I'm sorry. I'm looking for shading. And so I can turn down my transparency, start getting something a little bit more like this. Right. So we can play around with this and just get a whole bunch of different effects. In this particular case, there's not really like a perfect set of rules. Because everybody's scene is going to have different lighting. Everybody's coffee is going to look a little bit different. Everybody will want a different level of like turbulence and like how much it's swirling. Right? And so I could crank up my frequency here, turn up my turbulence strength, and let's see what that looks like. That'll work. Oh, where's it at? My Arnold render view's gone. So I have to render it this way. So, again, like I would probably do so this, you can't tell it too much, but there is like a lighter steam coming off of this, right? I'm going to look for the steam, but I understand that like some people's are going to be a little heavier than others. Everybody's project can be different though. Like I don't want you feeling like you have to follow a very rigid like template. Like maybe yours is an alien breakfast and it's got some variation of coffee that's coming out of it, but it's got like a green like wispy smoke that comes off of it. I'm also not going to make it like required that it's the coffee that is smoking, right? Like maybe you want to do a person who's eating a bowl of cereal around a campfire and you want to have like the glowing embers like smoking still yet, right? I just want to see some variation of smoke or steam in your scene, okay? Maybe they're eating like hot oatmeal as well, and you want to do that, right? So, any questions, comments on any of this? Okay. In a minute here, I'm going to go ahead and sort of stop the video. I'll bounce around and answer other questions. On the overall project, the only thing I haven't covered now of the required elements is the optional / bonus animated element, right? So you know how we rigged up the bottle or and the ball and like had it move around the scene? If you do another object like that in this scene, like just bring something on your breakfast table to life in some way, then that's basically just free extra bonus points. I think I can't remember how many it is. It's either 5 or 10 bonus points. So basically there's a potential of 105 points on this project. And I do that just to, for the people who are like, I really wanted to make something come to life, but this project doesn't have any of that. This gets you some more exercise with that. So it can be like put a bend on something or a squash and stretch on it, animate it bouncing around, and that's great. Yes?
I just have a creative question.
Okay. Later?
Yeah, like after you're done.
Gotcha. Any questions, comments on this? Yes?
Are we gonna go over what everything's due?
Yes, that was actually what I was going to get to here in a second. Any other questions on this part? Okay, so let me show you right now our couple of things here. What is happening, band? So the write-up. Oh, what's happening? Okay, there we go. So the write-up was in the document April 9th, right? Today's April 2nd. So basically that's a week from today, okay? But let me show you one more thing on that. So this is my schedule for the class. This is kind of how I try to keep us up to date. And you can see right there, we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule. I was not expecting to get all the way through the serial pour last class period. We did, so that's cool. Actually, yeah, this is good. So next class period is going to be open work time. And then it will be, the breakfast project will be due on the 9th, so basically a week from today. So you get tomorrow, or Wednesday's class, where I'll just be in here helping, Friday's class to work a little bit on it, and then it'll be due the following Monday. That's also when I'm going to kick off the details for the final. Now you'll notice in the final, I kind of have a schedule that I stick to where I'm going to, basically when we kick that off, you will start doing your concepts and modeling for the object. About a week after that, on the 16th, we will rig it together. And then a week after that, on the 23rd, we'll go through the animation process of it. So you get about a week for each of those phases, and then a week to kind of finish all that up for when our final is due. We'll talk about the final due date on the 9th when we kick off the final. Usually we have 2 options for when this project can be due, and I usually leave it up to the class to decide when they want to turn it in. I don't think I've ever had an instance where people didn't choose the latest possible date, but I could be surprised every semester. One of the things I do want to point out here is that right here on the 11th, after we kick off the final project, we're going to kick that off, and I'm basically going to tell you, go model this object, go get your character ready, because it's a character model. And then when we come back Wednesday, that's not a work day. That's an in-class discussion day. It's actually something I wish I could implement a little bit more into this class, which is time for us to talk about what all of this means, right? Remember we had a while back, kind of early on in the class, we talked about why it is you like animation. Like, do we have that day in here? We did, didn't we? I don't remember if we did. This will be that. Like, we're going to be talking about the different prospective jobs out there. But more importantly, we're going to be talking about your immediate future with the midpoint review, right? And there will be an extra exercise that goes along with that, which will be due by a little bit later, but it's not a big deal. It's just a smaller like research project where you're just going to be doing some Googling of stuff and sort of looking at some information, right? So although that looks like that's going to just be a work day, I really want to encourage you to be here on the 11th, and so we can have that conversation. That's where you're going to get a lot of information about sort of what happens after this, right? Any other questions, comments on this? All right, so again, a week from today is when this will be due. Hopefully that'll give you 2 days to work on it and the weekend to be rendering it. and we'll come in. We're going to do. I have a couple of different ways that we may do the review of it. I really like watching them up here on the big screen, but where it's a big class, sometimes it's hard to get through all of them. So we're going to do maybe a little variation on something. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video, and the rest of the class time will be time for you to work, or, I mean, it's open lab time, so if you're also like, nah, I'm going to go get food, I get that. But any questions you have or anything like that, I can work with you one-on-one on that. So. All right, cool. Let me go ahead and stop this video and be downloading it so I can upload it to YouTube.